Henry VIII would, throughout his time on the throne, have a huge amount of turmoil and chaos across his nation. He would dispatch 2 of his wives at the sharp axe blade within the walls of the Tower of London, but there was one of his wives who was considered the luckiest of the lot, as he would divorce her quickly, and she would be left with a huge amount of wealth and land all across England. Anne of Cleves is one of the most forgettable of the Tudor King's 6 wives, but she would throughout her life remain in England after the divorce, and she was known as the King's beloved sister. But Anne was herself a princess in her own right, and she was a rather promising young European woman, but she would be the longest living of Henry VIII's wives, and she is the only one of them who is today buried in the heart of England's religious worship, close to the founders of the Tudor dynasty in Westminster Abbey. Join us today as we look at the wife too ugly for Henry VIII, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Anne of Cleves was born in 1515 in Dusseldorf in Germany, and she was the second daughter of John III, the Duke of Jülichberg, or the Duke of Cleves. Her mother was Maria, the Duchess of Jülichberg, and she grew up in a large and lavish castle. Her father wanted to give Anne a great education, and her brother would then become the Duke following her father's death, but at the age of 11 Anne was betrothed to Francis, the heir of the Duke of Lorraine, but this betrothal was classed as unofficial, as Francis was underage. However, for her father and brother, it was hoped that Anne would one day marry a powerful European prince that would bring wealth and power to the family. But her father at the time was having disputes over the land with Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, and in the eyes of the English, following Henry VIII separating from the Pope and Rome, the Cleves girls seemed suitable allies and possible wives for the Tudor King. Following Henry VIII's 3rd wife's death, he was looking for a 4th wife. Jane Seymour is often believed to have been the love of Henry VIII's life, but she only really gave the king what he wanted in the form of a male successor and a male heir when she gave birth to Edward VI. But shortly after giving birth, Jane Seymour died from childbirth fever, and Henry then, without spending too long mourning, would go on the lookout for a 4th wife. He asked Thomas Cromwell to help him search, and Cromwell looked to European nations favourable to the English for a possible match, and he then settled on Anne of Cleves and her sister Amalia, and recommended the Cleves girls to Henry VIII. Because of this, Henry dispatched his painter Hans Holbein across to Europe to paint Anne and her younger sister Amalia, and both of these were in contention to be the 4th wife of the English king. But Henry would then choose Anne based on the images, and Cromwell would then oversee the marriage negotiations, and a huge dowry of 100,000 florins was agreed. But Anne was not Henry's normal woman, and she would not be the best educated, but she did like card games, and she could only really read and write in German. But she was gentle and unassuming, and many believed she was virtuous, and she was described as of middling beauty, and being very assured and resolute in her countenance. Another man stated of her appearance that, her hair hanging down, which was fair, yellow and long, she was apparelled after the English fashion with a French hood, which so set forth her beauty and good visage, that every creature rejoiced to behold her. She looked old for her years, but she was then sent to travel to England. She was accompanied and received by 50 English merchants. Then Henry VIII would meet with his bride privately on New Year's Day 1540 at Rochester Abbey, after Anne had come to Dover. It was said of the meeting that the king so went up into the chamber where the said Lady Anne was looking out of a window to see the bull baiting which was going on in the courtyard, and suddenly he embraced and kissed her, and showed her a token which the king had sent her for New Year's gifts, and she, being abashed and not knowing who it was, thanked him, and so he spoke with her, but she regarded him little, but always looked out of the window, and when the king saw that she took so little notice of his coming, he went into another chamber, and took off his cloak, and came in again in a coat of purple velvet, and when the lords and knights saw by his grace, they did him reverence. With this, Anne did not notice the king when he approached her, and she mistook him for an overweight courtier. She dreamt of marrying a dashing man and a king, but this was not the case, and Anne took little notice of Henry. But this put the king off his wife-to-be, but things had gone too far, and because of this Henry could not back out of marriage negotiations. The pair officially met on the 3rd of January, outside the gates of Greenwich Park, where there was a huge reception, but the king was embarrassed, and because of this he was put off the idea of marriage. He also found Anne to have not been the most attractive, and the two did marry on the 6th of January 1540, as there was no way out. This took place at the Palace of Placentia in Greenwich, and Archbishop of Canterbury Thomas Cranmer performed the marriage. Around the ring placed on Anne's finger was engraved, "God send me well to keep," but the marriage would not be successful. It is believed that Anne and Henry VIII would not physically consummate their marriage, and because of this the marriage was classed as invalid. Henry would state that, "I liked her before not well, but now I liked her much worse," and the king would kiss Anne on the head when she went to bed, and the pair would sleep separately. But Anne was then told to leave the royal court. Within 6 months she had been told that she was on her way out, and that the king was trying to dissolve the marriage. Anne did consent in the annulment, and Cromwell would be arrested for treason for his antics in sorting out the marriage, but he would then lose his head. But the marriage was officially annulled on the 12th of July 1540 on the grounds of non-consummation and the previous pre-contract of marriage that Anne had. But following this, Anne was then given a huge amount of land, and she was given Richmond Palace and also Hever Castle, the former home of the Boleyn family. She would live in her different properties and was classed as the king's beloved sister. But Anne would outlive Henry's fifth wife Catherine Howard, who lost her head in the Tower of London, and she was on cordial terms with the king following the annulment. She did not like Henry's sixth wife Catherine Parr, but she would outlive Henry's successor Edward VI. During the reign of Mary I, she went to congratulate Mary on her marriage, and she would also accompany her on a number of visits, and even attended the coronation procession. But Anne of Cleves was close to Princess Elizabeth, and this did attract some criticism and suspicion, but Anne would never return home to Europe, and remained in England. Anne's health began to go downhill, and she was allowed to live at Chelsea Old Manor, but in July 1557 she stated and outlined her will, and she would in this mention her brother and sister, and also the future Queen Elizabeth I. She left money to her household and asked for Mary and Elizabeth to look after them, whilst giving her jewels to them. But on the 16th of July 1557, Anne of Cleves died. It's mostly believed she died from cancer, but she would be the only wife of King Henry VIII, who was then buried inside of Westminster Abbey, close to where Henry VII and Elizabeth of York were. But Anne of Cleves was a wife who was regarded to have been too ugly for Henry VIII, but she would then do the best out of the wives, and she would receive a large amount of property and wealth following the divorce. But more importantly, she managed to keep her head, and she lived relatively comfortably following her divorce. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.